making this video to show how a standard transmission works. This is the inside, this is the guts of a manual transmission or standard transmission, sorry. I'm going to use both terms because that's how we use them in the automotive field. A manual transmission is put together with helical cut gears, usually with some spur gears, okay? Here's a spur gear here, the ones with the straight teeth across. And spur gears are handy because you can slide teeth in and out of contact with other spur gears. But helical cut gears are used where they don't have to slide in and out of engagement. The reason I'm doing this video is it's really hard to visualize how these things work. First, we have an input shaft. The clutch mounts to the outside of, or onto this input shaft. I'm gonna just see if this clutch mounts. It does, look at that. So when the clutch turns, so does the input shaft of the transmission, okay? Now, what I want to state here is that just because this is turning and all these gears is turning doesn't mean it's in gear. This transmission's actually in neutral right now. And I could hold the shaft here and spin the other gear if I had enough hands to do so, and nothing would drive. So this is the input shaft, and this first gear on the top of every transmission is called the input gear, okay? This gear here doesn't have a name like first gear, second gear, third gear, or anything like that, okay? So power comes into the input gear, and then the input gear turns, and what a lot of people think is that it just turns this way, but it doesn't. Okay, the input gear turns the counter shaft. This counter shaft down here has these 4 gears on it, and they're all welded solid to the counter gear. There you go. And this one extends on through here, and this is all solid, okay? So from here to here to here to here, and even here, those are all welded solid onto this shaft, okay? And they turn whenever this gear turns. The input gear turns, the counter gears, and they all turn, okay? But what isn't easy to see for you is that these gears up here are not welded solid onto their shafts, okay? You can't really see that. So the reason I'm shaking this back and forth is so that you can see that this moves a little independently as that. You can see that it just wiggles back and forth, right? This gear does not move solid with this gear. This gear does not move solid with this gear. This gear does not move solid with this gear. These are all free to turn on their shaft, okay? But because they're locked to their counter gear, they all turn, okay? But I'm not creating any movement on my output shaft because it's in neutral. So the power comes down into the counter shaft, and right now goes nowhere, okay? It goes nowhere because this gear at the end isn't locked onto the shaft either. So when you select a gear in a vehicle, you would slide this shift collar backwards. Now you can see that this collar has shifted over right next to this gear. You see how these ones are all in the middle? This one's in the middle. This one's not engaged with its gear, okay? Because these teeth are exposed, all right? When this locks in, now the power flow goes through the input gear to the counter shaft and then up through whichever gear is locked to the output shaft. This output shaft goes all the way to here. So power flows up from this gear to this gear. You see that? So, on this gear, we have a small gear driving a big gear. Then we have, let's say, a medium gear driving a big gear. And then we have almost two gears that are almost the same size, one driving another. Okay? And that's some of our different gear ratios. This one would be first gear. Small gear driving a big gear. We get gear reduction through that. We get low speeds, high torque. This one, because it's the second smallest gear, is second gear. That would make the one that I selected third gear. When I slide this back over again, which is very difficult on this old transmission, I'm back in neutral again. Okay? So now that we understand that the counter shaft is, oh, look at me, I'm walking around with me in Autotech in my videos that don't make sense. Now that you know that the counter shaft gears are welded on, counter shaft gears are welded solid all the way through, and that this is the input gear, and we have different gears here, I can actually shift this one and show you. Okay, now you should have watched clutch operation. So when I push in a clutch, you know that the gear stopped turning, but if you didn't watch it, now you know, okay? This transmission's in neutral right now. It appears like all the gears are turning. But the most important part of the transmission, the output shaft, is not turning, okay? That's neutral. I'm going to clutch, gear stop turning, and I'm gonna select first gear. Do you see that collar shifting back? That's first gear. When I let it go, I'll be in first. First is very slow. First gear is the power coming from the clutch into the input gear. The input gear drives the counter shaft. Because this shift collar locked this gear to the output shaft, the power is then driven from this gear here on the counter shaft up through first gear and out the output shaft. Let's get second gear. Now, if you were watching this, maybe you can predict what's going to move in second gear. I'll just give you a second to think about it, okay? And shift to neutral, back in neutral. Now I'm gonna shift a second, think in your head which shift fork's gonna move. If you guessed that one, you were correct. This one right here. Gonna release the clutch. The power flow is gonna be from the clutch through to the input gear. That's the same on every single gear. Down to the counter shaft. And now, because this gear is locked to the output shaft, it's going to drive this tooth that drives second gear and then out. Alrighty, let's see if you guys know what third is. Bet you don't. Okay, you were right. It's this one. Third gear. Power comes in through the input gear, down to the counter shaft, then drives this gear. Now if you notice, this gear and this gear are getting really close to the same size. They're not. This one's a little bit smaller than this gear yet, okay? Very close though. Power comes in through the input gear down to the counter shaft, then this gear drives this gear to give us third gear. That's what we're in right now. Okay, now the very, very tricky fourth gear. It's not that tricky. It's the simplest gear of them all. simplest gear of them all. Did you see that collar move over? Yeah. Well, what it did was it locked the input gear to the output shaft. So that means that the clutch turns the input gear, but power does not go down. Power goes straight through. Because the input gear is locked to the output shaft, every rotation of the flywheel and the clutch is a rotation of the output shaft. This is called a 1-to-1 ratio, where we could put 100 RPMs into the input and we would get 100 RPMs out. Pretty neat. Gonna just take a look back at our transmission here. Where this input gear, you can see that it doesn't match the shaky that I get over here. This is separate from this gear. So when the shift fork goes over, it locks the input shaft to the output shaft and the power goes straight through. Okay, that's 4 gears. Now, it's kind of funny. Many years ago, you can get yourself a 5-speed transmission. It was very popular to have 3- and 4-speed transmissions. So one day, I think someone just decided, hey, I want to have a 5-speed transmission. And 5 speeds are good. They give you an overdrive. They give you better fuel mileage on the highway, things like that. Back when fuel was cheap and motors had lots of power and actually pretty good economy, people didn't really worry about fuel economy that much. So they made 5 gears by adding onto the back of the transmission. Normally, the transmission would have stopped here. To give it 5th, they've coupled 5th and reverse back here. And it's kind of funny how that has lasted for so many years. Like, you would almost think they would have redesigned a transmission different than this, but on most transmissions, gear 5 is like an add-on on the back of the transmission. Fun fact. So 5th gear is over there. It slides the collar over. And it locks what is the biggest gear on the counter shaft. Okay? It's a lot bigger than this gear. It locks the biggest gear on the counter shaft to, you're not really going to be able to see it, about a smaller gear. So that's called overdrive. When our input speed is going to be slower than our output speed. All the other gears are the other way around. Where, you know, if I was running at 1,000 RPM, I'd be running at 500 RPM. In this scenario, if I was running at 1,000 RPM, okay, I might be running at 1,200 RPM on the way out. That gear ratio allows our vehicles to, our engines to run slower and get good speed out while we're just cruising down the highway. All right. Now reverse. I can't really show you very well, but reverse is that lever moving backwards. I think you can see the rotation direction of the engine and the flywheel, and there's the rotation direction of the output shaft. So reverse, and it's just because I didn't take the trainer apart to show you it. Reverse is incorporating another gear. You can see that you can't at my fingertips there. Gear here, and gear here. When you engage 2 gears, they turn in opposite directions. This one here is turning this way, and this one down here is turning that way. Every time you mesh two gears together, they change direction. So all they do with reverse is they incorporate a third gear. So when they engage it, because all these are two gear relationships, this one is a three gear relationship, the output turns in the opposite direction. I hope that is a good insight into how manual transmissions work. All these gears that mesh together are sitting in gear oil. Gear oil is a heavy oil. Typically it's around 80 W90, an 80 weight oil compared to your 5 and 10 weight oils in engines. And the oil level would be the level of the countershaft. About that. When it starts to spin, the oil slings off the gears and lubricates the whole transmission. We have ball bearings, so everything spins nicely. And manual transmissions are pretty reliable. They usually only fail with lubrication issues, as in there was an oil leak and leaked out all the oil. Or people shifting way too hard, pulling too much weight, kind of abusing their vehicles. Okay, that's an oversight of how the manual transmission works. I hope that clarifies some manual transmission questions that you had.